And now, Ghostlight.
This house is Gabriel Chase, is it not?
Excuse me, sir. As I understood it, you would not be arriving till this evening.
This is a test recording made on my completely reconfigured laptop, so if the sound quality is slightly different than usual, I'm sorry, and if it's better, hurrah! For those of you who've been listening to the WhoCast, like me, you'll have been very impressed with their coverage of the Sylvester McCoy era. They reviewed in great depth the story Curse of Fenric, and so I'd like to join in as well by reviewing the story Ghostlight, perhaps my all-time favourite Doctor Who story. So if you're expecting me to slate this, really, it's just not going to happen. Ghostlight was the last ever recorded Doctor Who story, as far as the original run was concerned, and until 1996, we thought it was the last ever recorded Doctor Who story, period. So what's it all about? Well, rather oddly, that's the sort of question that's been being asked by Doctor Who fans since it was first broadcast in 1989. I know recently I've been hammering on about steampunk, so for this particular story I'll avoid all that. Suffice to say that it has a Victorian setting, and it has the use of technology far beyond its current time. Yeah, let's get back to the actual story itself. Ghostlight is a 3-episode story, and most Doctor Who fans feel it should have had 4, and just a little bit more exposition, and as such it demands more than one viewing, which isn't necessarily a bad thing. By this point in Sylvester's run as the Doctor, we'd been presented with a sneakier, more manipulative Doctor, and here we have a wonderful example of the slightly darker version of the Doctor manipulating Ace, his then companion, played marvellously by Sophie Aldred. And again there is a great interview with her on the most current, I think number 90, WhoCast. Mark Platform, he's the author, had been trying to get a foot in the door with the Doctor Who production crew for some time. He'd been sending off letters to the script editors all the way back to Robert Holmes. Finally he was asked in, and he was asked to submit an idea for a story. The first story he actually tried to pitch was Cat's Cradle, which eventually became one of the Virgin New Adventures. It kind of needed a gigantic budget to pull off. I'm sure someone once told me it had a scene that took place in Wembley Stadium full of people. Yeah, that's kind of not going to happen on a show that costs £1.50 and a bag of chips every week to produce. And so he gets asked to bring up something else. He comes back with an idea for stone-headed aliens. This is set in the 19th century in Russia, and he then gets asked into the office. The story goes that Ben Uranovich asked him if he'd read any Mervyn Peake. Now, if you ever get the chance to read, rather than watch Gormenghast, I heartily recommend it. Even the novella A Boy in the Dark has wonderful atmosphere, very much akin to this story. So of course the answer was yes. Mark Platt is exceptionally widely read, and as usual he's disappointed and gets told that they didn't really want the Russian story. He also gets told by the script editor that they're thinking of looking into putting the mystery back into Doctor Who, or more, the mystery back into the Doctor. At this point, Mark then comes back and says, I've got this idea for a plot, where the Doctor returns to his own home on Gallifrey, and it's the last place in the universe he wants to be. The rest of the Doctor's family, for you would have seen them, are all driven mad, kind of with embarrassment at the fact that the Doctor is part of their family. In this story, the family's name for the Doctor comes out, their pet name. They called him Snail, because he, unlike everyone else, has a belly button that looks a little bit like a snail's shell. I always loved that aspect. This story was to be called Lung Barrow, and eventually it would see the light of day as a Virgin Adventure. Don't bother trying to track down this book on eBay. It'll end up costing you about 60 quid, and it's very good, but it's not worth it because you can have it for free. Visit the BBC website, download it from there, and just read something wonderful. This, of course, isn't about Lungbarrow, it's about Ghostlight. And the reason that Lungbarrow became Ghostlight was because the then producer, John Nathan Turner, didn't really want to move that far, that fast. He saw a story like Lungbarrow taking place in a few years' time, once the mystery had been sort of laid on a lot more thick, and also the Cartmel master plan, which I'm sure everyone's heard far too much about, had the Doctor taking the place of one of the mythical triumvirate, the mystical three of Gallifrey, from their ancient records, almost making the Doctor a god. And legend has it that John Nathan Turner just heard the Doctor is God and kind of freaked a bit, without really paying that much more attention to what was happening. And so it was kind of back to the drawing board. The best aspects of Lungbarrow were taken, put in the blender, reshaped, and we were given Ghostlight.
I need your help, Doctor.
Yes, it can't be easy being so far away from home, struggling to adapt to an alien environment.
My roots are in this house. I'm as human as you are.
Yes.
The day that I decided to record a quick podcast all about Ghostlight was also the day that on Radio 4 there was some very odd news. The Church, that's the Church of England, had decided in its infinite wisdom to apologise to Charles Darwin. Now, for those of you who are aware of, facts, Charles Darwin's dead. But more importantly, this apology would actually be written down and read out loud above his grave, as if he'd be able to hear it. Now, whether you believe in an afterlife or not, this does sound very, very odd, and, to be honest, very, very English. And I just thought it was fitting that that was on the news the day that I decided to talk about Ghostlight. At its core, Ghostlight is about evolution, but perhaps that's more of a simplistic view of things. I think I'll split this podcast into two very distinct parts. First, I'll talk about the production and my thoughts on it, and then we'll have some music, and after that, I'll tell you what I think Ghostlight is really about. But ask yourself this: do I really want to know what Ghostlight is actually about? Do I really want to know what's happening? Will that not spoil my enjoyment? Now, for those of you who haven't seen it, that might sound a very odd thing to say, but for those of you who have seen it, understanding everything, will that not, make it less magical? Well, decide for yourself. So let's talk for a moment more about Ghostlight itself. As has already been said, the story's origins are twofold. First, in Mark Platt's marvellous attempts to get a script made, and with Lungbarrow, and more in the Victorian melodrama. Doctor Who itself had never ever dealt with evolution as a theme. It had dealt with aliens using science, for example the demons. But here we have a multi-layered, exceptionally literary storyline, and as I have just said, at its core a discussion on evolution. Now, until the Satan Pit, Doctor Who's heart had been primarily one of science. All religious arguments in the series had been put to one side and largely ignored in exchange for the scientific take on things. Now, as evolution is fairly well accepted these days, it was nice to be able to see the story unfold using aspects of Victorian melodrama as well. The literary aspects of this story are fairly obvious, things like the turn of the screw, and also it's worth noting that the human housekeeper in the story has the same name as the housekeeper in the turn of the screw, as a small joke put there by the author. It's as if the housekeeper leaves this story and goes into something completely different, make it more multi-textual. This story has so much going on, almost too much. The casual viewer is wowed more by the spectacle, the particularly high production values, and it's not until you start questioning what's actually going on that things start to jar slightly. And it's not a case of, as with some Pertwee stories, you're sort of sitting there watching it going, what's going on? Oh yeah, this is happening. It's more to do with the fairly popular television and other narrative conventions of repeating things for the audience, explaining things. Some would say spoon-feeding, but this was Doctor Who made for fans that had grown up with the series, ones who wanted to be able to ask more questions. As has been said elsewhere, a story almost made for the video age, demanding rewatching. Of course, in these days of rewatching back in 1989, as well as the VHS, we had the remarkably well-written Virgin novelisation, or as it was then, Target Books. I would suggest tracking that down and paying a couple of quid for it, rather than paying the 60-odd quid for Lung Barrow. Similarly, the script book is also available, with a lot of interesting facts and interesting takes on how things evolved, no pun intended. As well as a discussion on evolution, this story is part of what some people could refer to as the Ace story arc. People didn't use words like story arcs, but continuation of characters really fits in here, and here the Doctor has taken Ace, his then companion, back to something that troubled her from her own childhood, a haunted house she'd visited.
Doctor! Doctor, where are you? I want to talk to you!
Ace! What's the matter?
Basic Matthews in there says this house is Gabriel Chase.
So?
It's all falling down last time I saw it in 1983. You tricked me! This is Perivale! It's true, isn't it? This is the house I told you about.
When you were 13, you climbed over the wall for a dare.
That's your surprise, isn't it? Bringing me back here.
Remind me what it was that you sensed when you entered this deserted house. An aura of intense evil?
Don't you have things you hate?
I can't stand burnt toast. I loathe bus stations, terrible places, full of lost luggage and lost souls.
I told you I never wanted to come back here again.
And then there's unrequited love, and tyranny, and cruelty.
Too right.
We all have a universe of our own terrors to face.
I face mine on my own terms.
But don't you want to know what happened here?
No!
There were plans in the original running order to have a line in the Curse of Fenric, which was originally meant to be shown earlier, where Ace talks about visiting a haunted house, but as things got moved around, the lines were dropped. This was to make the Doctor more interested in looking at Ace's life, which is fine, nicely set up, but it doesn't detract from this story itself. The Doctor is training Ace up for something. Getting back to the Cartmel master plan, it was meant to be that eventually she would become in training to become a Time Lord herself, or at least join Gallifreyan society. Confronting her old fears and revisiting Perivale, where she's from, and again in Survival Later, which were two stories which were meant to bookend each other, all fit into this season exceptionally well. The Doctor takes her back to the haunted house to confront things, to deal with the feelings of dread that she couldn't quite name when she was younger, this alien malevolence. And of course the alien malevolence in Doctor Who is almost invariably brought on by an alien. First off, Ace and Doctor meet a great white hunter straight out of the pages of some Victorian romance, possibly something by Edgar Rice Burroughs, which I know was written later, but bear with me. And then, after seeing the incredible madman, there is the Neanderthal butler called Nimrod. Yes, he's from a hunter-gatherer tribe, and he's called Nimrod, which for some people would be a bit of a Mickey-take name, on the grounds that Nimrod was one of the biblical great hunters. And again we're back to the whole Bible versus evolution argument that runs throughout the story. We meet the Reverend Ernest Matthews, who's here to have a go at Josiah Smith, the owner of the house, so that they can have their great debate. Already many seeds are sown for extended story arcs throughout this particular story. We have the fact that the housekeeper leaves at 6 o'clock and the maids come out of the wall. Yeah, they were meant to sort of glide out like the nun in the Blues Brothers, but you can't have everything, no matter how much you want it, especially on a BBC budget. And it's at this point that the mystery gets stepped up. Odd things happen, and I think I'll break and give you a chance to think about whether you want to know what I think is really happening in this story or not. If you are leaving me, I just want to say a couple of things. I'd like to thank everyone for all of the feedback I've had of late, and especially thanks for donating to help keeping the Tin Dog podcast running. I'd also like to thank everyone who emailed me after hearing my unit dating feedback on the WhoCast. Thanks for playing that, guys. I hope it didn't cause too many arguments. And so here's a song used in Ghostlight and available as an Easter egg on the DVD.
I don't know what it is about my figure or my style, that every time I walk abroad, the passers-by do smile. I lost myself in Kensington about a week today. I asked a cabman my way home, when to me he did say, that's the way to the zoo, that's the way to the zoo. The monkey house is nearly full, there's room enough for you. Take a bus to Regent's Park, make haste before it shuts. Next Monday I will come and bring you such a lot of nuts. That's the way to the zoo, that's the way to the zoo. The monkey house is nearly full, but there's room enough for you. Take a bus to Regent's Park, make haste before it shuts. Next Monday I will come and bring you such a lot of nuts.
So, apart from dealing with the vexed question of evolution, what was Ghostlight actually about? What was going on? I know from watching the commentaries and the documentaries, it's obvious that the cast weren't completely sure what was going on. But is understanding truly needed? I mean, do you understand everything that goes on in your life? Yeah, that's more of a different question for everyone, isn't it? Getting back to this. What exactly is going on in Lungbarrow? There is a creature, let's call him Light, for sake of argument, who, like Avalon in Babylon 5, is perceived by people as an angel. We'll call him a recording angel. His job is to pop to planets and make complete records of everything that lives there. As part of this trip, he has two companions. He is a holy trinity. One companion, let's call him the Experiment, goes out into the world and evolves into the most dominant life form available. The other person, also part of this experiment, again not a very well thought out experiment, calls themselves Control, because every experiment needs a control, something to compare the finished experiment with, to see how far they've gone. In between planets, this creature called Light goes to sleep. The creature called Control isn't particularly happy, but the creature that is the Experiment is fairly mutinous. This experiment person sheds his skins at the end of every single trip. These are the husks, which still have some of his life force inside. Of course, the real reason that they're in there is twofold. The first is John Nathan Turner thought, can we have a Doctor Who story that doesn't actually have any monsters? I don't think so. And a more literary thought would be that they really do bear a resemblance to several of the characters from Alice in Wonderland, and as Ace is actually called Alice at one point by one of the other characters, and they do a whole going down the rabbit hole, it's just another literary reference in an already peppered story. So, Light is asleep, the Experiment takes control, and a spaceship that travels at the speed of thought ends up back on Earth. Now, when I first saw the story, I really thought that the ship had always been underneath the ground, which eventually had the house built on top of it. Apparently that's not so, according to the DVD commentaries and the script books. Light had visited Earth at least twice, once during the dinosaurs era, and several million years later during Nimrod's time where he was taken. This is the third trip at least. Light is locked away, and as Control and the Experiment can't exist separate from each other, the Experiment, Josiah, locks Control away. His basic programming is to continually evolve into the most dominant species available, and to do this he becomes a Victorian gentleman. He has very odd ideas, but of course he believes in evolution because he's from a race that has witnessed it time and time again. Why the recording angel is annoyed when he sees how much things have evolved is almost beyond me, but let's leave that. More literary references abound. When the Doctor and Ace finally arrive, people being sent to Java, things akin to lines from Arsenic and Old Lace, the eating of insects from Dracula, also where people sleeping during the day and coming to life at night, again vampire novels. The Alice in Wonderland references abound as well. But getting back to the story. If Lungbarrow was the worst place in the universe for the Doctor ever to visit, Gabriel Chase is the worst place in the world for Ace to visit, because she burnt it down. She destroys Gabriel Chase in the future, so therefore it has to survive in order to fulfill the causality loop. Causality loop is just a posh way of saying A follows B follows C, not necessarily in that order. Some things I never ever quite understand, because when Josiah wants...
Oh, things are getting out of control. Even I can't play this many games at once.
Help me. Help me with my hunt.
I haven't got time, Redfurs.
But I'm hunting the rarest creature in the world. The crowned sex, Kuberg. Look.
Really? And who's sponsoring the expedition? Josiah Samuel Smith.
You're never completely sure why he wants Queen Victoria out of the way. Why would killing the monarch take out the whole of the empire and allow him to rule it? Doesn't quite make sense, but that's by the by. And so everything gets completely out of hand. The ship's obviously been there for a while, because when it first arrived the policeman came calling, and that was when he was taken away. The house's original inhabitants had been hypnotised, or something had gone on, and we're never ever quite sure where the staff come from. But then with all evil supervillains you're never quite sure where the staff come from, so it's hardly down to this story. Yes, it's a mystery. It's a mystery about what's really going on, but it's also a mystery about the characters and where they're going, and I for one am very happy with this story. Yes, I've missed things out, like all of the references to William Blake, but you can read too much into this story. When it comes down to it, it's basically an extremely good romp. It confuses the audience, but like many directors have said in the past, an audience would rather be confused than bored any day. And so I'll leave this story, and you can track it down in any format you want and enjoy it yourself. So until next time, be seeing you. You have been listening to the Tin Dog Podcast. Doctor Who and its associated shows are all trademark of the BBC. No infringement is intended. Contact us at tin-dog@hotmail.co.uk.
Who was it said Earthmen never invite their ancestors round to dinner?